because number one, in order to declare war, you have to have congressional act. You don't have to have any type of authority to call something a hostility. Now we can move on to section 2, which is now our definition for covered persons. Remember, we're still in section 1022 that deals with foreign terrorists. Foreign terrorist covered persons. The requirement in paragraph 1 shall apply to any person whose detention is authorized under section 1021 who is determined to be of or part of Al-Qaeda or an associated force that acts in coordination with or pursuant to the direction of Al-Qaeda, and to have participated in the course of planning or carrying out an attack or an attempted attack against the United States or its coalition partners. We're pretty clear then that these are foreign Al-Qaeda terrorists. But what about that limitation mentioned, that section 4, except in section 4, the previous paragraph said? Well, let's read section 4. Section 4 says, a waiver for national security. The President may waive the requirement of paragraph 1, which refers to paragraph 2. So when you're interpreting a statute, when a paragraph refers to another one, they pull them all into the same enforcement. So basically what this is saying is, the President may waive the requirement of paragraph 1 to include paragraph 2 if the President submits to Congress a certification in writing that such a waiver is in the national security interests of the United States. What that paragraph does is gives the President of the United States the ability to waive and alter the definition of a covered person without any limitation whatsoever if he deems it to be in the national security interests of the United States. Another argument you'll hear from those that supported this law is that the law that was passed is fundamentally different than the law that was initially proposed. Well, I don't know about fundamentally, but there are a few differences. So let's talk about those differences. And one of those differences actually falls into section 4, the waiver for national security. The original bill submitted said, the Secretary of Defense may, in consultation with the Secretary of State and the Director of National Intelligence, waive the requirement of paragraph 1 if the Secretary submits to Congress a certification in writing that such a waiver is in the national security interests of the United States. A waiver in the original bill submitted had to be given in consultation of 3 people. 3 people had to come to the conclusion that a waiver was necessary for the national security interests of the United States. But the bill passed says, the President may waive the requirement from the hands of 3 to the hands of 1. Now, another thing that we really have to be aware of, this says the President may waive the requirement of paragraph 1 if the President submits to Congress a certification in writing that such a waiver is in the national security interests of the United States. Nothing in paragraph 4 requires a vote of Congress, requires an approval of Congress, requires any type of congressional oversight whatsoever. All it requires is something in writing from the President that this is necessary, and then it's done. Now remember, we are still in section 1022. Foreign terrorists. This is where we find the language that those that support this law hang their hat on. the applicability to United States citizens and lawful resident aliens, subsection B. This language reads, United States citizens. The requirement to detain a person in military custody under this section does not extend to citizens of the United States. The requirement to detain does not extend. When you tell an administrative agency they are not required to do something, you're giving them a choice. They can choose whether to detain or not to detain. This is not exclusionary language. The proof of this is we have already laws in place with exclusionary language. If they wanted to, without a doubt, exclude U.S. citizens, the language already existed in previous law. They could have simply cut and paste. Now remember, this is foreign. This has nothing to do with 1021, the any person, belligerent act, or hostility. These are foreign, but it also, remember, in foreign was the subsection 4 waiver by the president. Okay? So that's how you can get U.S. citizens in here. Remember the CRS summary that said it makes the requirement inapplicable to U.S. citizens? Now we have the actual language which says the requirement to detain a person in military custody under this section does not extend to U.S. citizens. That is a one-sentence statement, replaced by a one-sentence statement in the CRS summary that does not even accurately reflect what the law says. Inapplicable is nowhere close to being not required. How could they have made this language clear? Like I said, the language already exists in law. When bill writers sit down to write bills, they don't reinvent the wheel every time they do it. What they do is they take language from laws that already exist because they're tried and true. They know that they will withstand legal argument. They could have done that with this bill. Remember, the section says the requirement to detain a person in military custody does not extend to U.S. citizens. What about the Civil Rights Act of 1964? That law has been on the books for a long time. That law says that you cannot discriminate against a person for hiring practices based on their religion, their race, their gender. But there's a section in there, section 2000 E2E2, which sets up an exception for churches and religious organizations and private clubs. Because if you're a church and you're going to hire a pastor, you're certainly going to want to discriminate based on religion. And sometimes you're even going to discriminate based on gender. So in order for the Civil Rights Act to comply with the First Amendment, they had to incorporate an exception in this law. The exception says, it shall not be an unlawful employment practice for these churches, religious organizations, and private clubs to discriminate in these ways. Shall not be. In the legal world, when a judge sees the words shall not, it means he has no choice. So, the requirement to detain does not extend, leaves a choice. But shall not extend to U.S. citizens is legally exclusive and leaves no choice. Now, this is not the only language that our bill makers could have used in this section. Another example of exclusionary language exists in our vaccination laws. every state has a law requiring vaccinations. Almost every state has a section in their vaccination laws that excludes certain groups of people. Groups of people who would be medically damaged by vaccinations, or groups of people who do not believe that vaccinations are in line with their religious beliefs. So now we have laws with another section that excludes groups of citizens. In Florida, it's Florida Statute 1002.20, subsection 3b. And it reads, "The parent of any child attending a public or private school shall be exempt from school immunization requirements upon meeting the exemptions in accordance with the provisions